Hello, this is Rich Kale here on YouTube, and just recently I started thinking about all the games I played on the channel, and I decided I was going to start looking back at these games, their impressions overall, and all that I've had on them. And I thought I'd start with the first one I put up, which was Shivers. Now, that game came out in 1995, I believe. I could be wrong, it could be off by a year. But this game actually really made an impact on me. I was in college at the time, and I was also in a bit of a serious Sierra phase. I got back into Sierra games basically when I hit college. But Shivers, when I saw it was a Sierra game, I wanted to pick it up, and I actually found it at a local Sam's Club to where I live. Now, this appealed to me, but the only drawback of it was I couldn't play it on my computer. The copy I got was for Windows 95 only, and I was playing it on my mother's computer, which she had recently got, which was Windows 95. Now, this game really I enjoyed, and there were certain things about it that appealed to me so much that it really made an impact on me. Now, first off, if you're unfamiliar with the game, you are essentially dared to spend the night at a haunted museum. The museum part appealed to me. I mean, I have a love for museums, but a museum to the strange and unusual. Now, to be honest, in the early 90s, even in the 80s, you don't necessarily hear about these weird oddities. So, I mean, the only museums I'd been to were art museums, museums of natural history. Franklin Institute is considered a bit of a museum too. So, these are the museums I went to. Science museums, interactive museums. So, a museum devoted to strange and unusual aspects of our lives, or of the world, was an interesting thing to me. Also, I have a great love for puzzles. So, the puzzle aspect of the game appealed to me as well. So, I really got into this game. I think I solved most of the puzzles possibly without a walkthrough in my initial playthrough of it. Now, another thing that was very appealing to me was if you look through it and actually play it, there is a lore, a backstory in it. And I don't even know. I try to look into it and I wonder how much of it is made up and how much of it is actual lore. And I'm trying to remember, though, if it was Incan or Aztec lore that was involved. But given the museum, it makes perfect sense that it was a beautiful thing. They had such an intricate lore. Because when you go into the museum, all that's known is that the owner, apparently, the legend is that the owner killed two teens that were trespassing in the museum and then, quote, fled. But that wasn't the case. In his discoveries, and as you learn more about why the museum is abandoned, why it took so long, why it's considered, people consider it a bad thing or have, negative feelings, you found out that Professor Windelknot, he discovered lore of something called exupipots, and he bought the collection, which in turn caused the migrant workers to quit. Well, but it was discovered these things were actually real. In fact, everybody who's ever owned them has met with a gruesome fate, and the collection keeps diminishing. So when you get in, you learn about, you know, the woes of the museum, how it came about. You learn how these things came about through looking up the lore. So now you're not only spending the night at a haunted museum, you're trying to capture these things in order to, save people, to make sure these things don't get out again. Well, so that's part of the game, and this adds to the game. Now, another thing that was good about this game is the music. That really adds to the environment. I even found myself, even after not playing the game for some years, I found myself humming some of the music from the game, which re-sparked me to play the game again. So, I mean, that's another beautiful thing, because the museum is just the music for the museum is just perfect for each room. You go into a room devoted to underwater myths, and you get like a nautical theme to the music, perfect for the nighttime, for the being at sea. You go into a room devoted to witch doctors and shamans, and you get something like a chanting that would be akin to what we perceive with a witch doctor. The One of the most notable musical areas is actually the space exhibits devoted to UFOs and ancient aliens, and my God, that music is beautiful in that area. But this is a game I do enjoy, and that music captivates me. And there have been a lot of things that have inspired me and linked me. This game has found I found so many links through it. And there has to be a credit said to the procedures that Sierra had used and created for installing of the game, because it installed on Windows 95. In fact, the initial release, there was a quote Windows 95 version and a version that would also work on Windows 3.1. I only ever had the Windows 95 one. But when I got another computer, I had a Windows 95 computer for about 10 years, and when I got another computer, it was Windows Vista. And lo and behold, I was able to install it on Windows Vista. I tried to install it on Windows 7.0, which was on my late wife's laptop, and it didn't work. Which just shows they did something right with the installation procedures of all these. But it's just a remarkable thing that this game could last so long. I still have the actual CD I got when I had the game, when I first got the game. So, but it's been such an inspiration to me. In fact, the museum setting sort of played an inspiration in one story I wrote, where I decided I'd have the characters end up at a museum to the strange and unusual. But it wasn't as bad as the Exupi situation. But I also years later wrote an adaptation based off the game. But due to the fact that Shivers for a long time has been relatively obscure in Sierra's library, I decided to mix it with another thing that was getting a revamp at the time I started the story, which was Kolchak the Night Stalker. A good series, and I do recommend it. I mean, even though it was made in the 70s, it was still a good series. And I've also worked on In fact, during my own work on that story, one time while looking stuff up, I came across something that I hadn't expected. I came across an episode of a podcast. The podcast was called Into the Score. It was a wonderful little podcast. A budding teacher of music in Canada started the podcast, and he would basically look at music from video games from an academic standpoint. And one episode he actually devoted to Shivers. And he was a fan of this game too. And I became a fan of his series, and I have all the podcast's recordings. Every once in a while, I'll pull them out and listen to them, just as a reminder of what he had there. And the fact that he really examined this game's music was phenomenal. And as it is, Into the Score sort of inspired me to seek out other things, and even inspired another work that I started work on that I am close to finishing at the time of this recording. Relatively close to finishing. Now, I also found years later that somebody had taken as a labor of love to make an app for an Android tablet to play Shivers. And they did a good job. I don't think it's ever reached 1.0, but they did a very good job, and I think I understand why it never reached 1.0. You see, as he was working on it, GOG, Great Old Games, Grand Old Games, however you want to refer to GOG as, they were in the process of basically getting Shivers so they could, make it available through their store and all that. And it took them a while, but they managed to do it. In fact, Shivers is now, I think, only able to be found on GOG.com for purchase and use on newer computers. And I do recommend getting it. And it's because of the love of this game. As I said, it was my first playthrough that I did on my channel when I was finally able to do something like that. Now, if you're a fan of puzzle games, you're a fan of horror games, well, this is mild on the horror game spectrum, but I do recommend this, in part for the experience, in part for the sheer beauty of the game. I mean, when you look at it and you read up on it, every image was a hand-painted watercolor that once they were done, they basically scanned them into the computer. That's amazing work for what they did. It's a piece of art, and I do recommend picking up the game. I do recommend playing the game, basically for the experience. And I enjoyed replaying it. It's a game I will replay from time to time just for fun. So, I hope you understand why this game is so special, at least to me, and if you give it a chance, I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. If not, everything about it, there are going to be aspects of it you will enjoy. Listen to the music while you go around the museum. If you like the puzzles, take the time, figure them out. I figured out most of them without walkthroughs or any guides to solving them. They are solvable if you know what you're doing, or if you take time to look for the clues. I mean, the story, when you discover the story, it makes a lot of sense. And I think that's also part of the enjoyment. Anyhow, that's all I have to say on Shivers, and I hope you found this interesting. As always, as I say, if you enjoy the content on the channel, please subscribe. And you may find something that you may not have expected to be interesting, or you may get a good laugh out of some of my antics, especially if I look like I'm or sound like I'm absolutely scared out of my gourd. As always, this is Rich Kale on YouTube, Rich Gen X elsewhere. Have a good one, all. Bye.